Good evening, everybody in India. Good evening and good afternoon to those of you in Europe, and good morning to those of you in North America. Welcome to the Packard Network Live. I'm very pleased today to have a very special guest, somebody that I've known for well over a decade, to join me on the program to share some great insight live from New Delhi, India, Mr. Ranjit Bedi. Ranjit, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Brett, and delighted to be here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. This is streaming live on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So thanks in advance to all of you that are tuning in, and I'll be checking in with you throughout the course of the next hour while Ranjit and I are having a conversation about his success, his journey, and what he's up to nowadays. So we're going to talk about that. But before we turn over the microphone to Ranjit, this person has so much credibility that I really want to spend a couple of minutes myself talking about many of the great things that he's done as well. Ranjit is currently a global executive, and he's a life coach. He's got 2.5 decades of leadership experience across 3 continents. That's where he and I met. He's worked in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and across many different parts of the African continent, which is huge, diverse set of great countries and great people. And Ranjit comes from a family rich in tradition in the armed forces. So if any of you have any questions about that, tee those up as well. And but basically, for the first half of his career, Ranjit was a banker, and he established a terrific legacy at Citigroup and Barclays Bank across both mature and emerging markets. And so his experience is both broad and deep in that as well. And he specialized in insurance, consumer finance, and a number of other general retail banking aspects in different parts of the world. For those of you in North America, banking is actually more complex outside of the U.S. Because you've got a much different set of regulations, and the solutions and product offerings are quite different and diverse. Ranjit has started new ventures. He's transformed businesses. He's developed partnerships. I personally have witnessed one of those significant partnerships during our time together in Africa. And so he knows how to put together deals. And basically, after doing all of this for 2.5 decades, Ranjit decided to go back to India. And he relocated from Johannesburg back home to be where his family was a top priority. He and I have I did the same thing, as many of you know, and then he underwent, and we'll talk a bit about this, a period of a lot of personal reflection during this time when he's stepping away from the corporate world. Ranjit did it after 25 years. I did it after 30 years. So about the same thing. I can really relate to that, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Ranjit to you on the program, because many of you might be thinking about a transition. Or you've been pondering something for a while. So I'm really hoping this conversation can help get you through that much more efficiently, just by hearing from 2 people, Ranjit and I, that have both done that as well. So now Ranjit has a portfolio career in executive and life coaching. He's got a ton of certifications. He services many different sectors of the economy, financial services, education, healthcare, technology, manufacturing. So it's very broad. He's no longer a banker, I'm pleased to say, and neither am I. I'm pleased to say that as well. And so I think that we'll get into I'll let Ranjit talk later about his niches and what he specifically is involved with. But he's a credentialized professional certified coach, PCC ICF. He's a positive, intelligent, a PQ coach. certified LCP, which is Leadership Circle Profile Practitioner. And he also has an MBA degree from the University of Hull in the UK, a business comm degree with honors from Shriram College of Commerce, Delhi University, and an executive leadership program from IIM and the Fuqua Business School, which Duke University in the United States. And in addition, he's an active member of the International Coaching Federation and the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. So with that, Ranjit, I'm worn out, so I'm going to take a sip of water and welcome you again to the program. So great to have you here, Ranjit. So it's thank you for tuning in from Delhi today. It's an honor to have you on the program. Ranjit, why don't we kind of get right into the topic? And for those of you that are tuning in live, as mentioned, I'll be kind of checking in with you throughout the conversation. I might even pause what we're doing in favor of any questions that you have or comments. Please let me know, especially for those of you on LinkedIn, which is where the majority of the audience will be, but I'll be dipping into Facebook as well. Let me know where you're tuning in from. It'd be great. And I'm really happy to do a shout out as to where you're at throughout the program as well. But please do tee up any questions for Ranjit or for myself. If you'd like to ask me anything as well, we can do that. This program's about Ranjit, but we will certainly do that. And I'd like to, Ranjit, before we get into it, I'd like to welcome Webster Melito, who is here. Webster, thank you so much for tuning in. We have Paul from Nigeria, good friend of mine. Paul is a great leader on a mission to change leadership in Africa, and it's great there as well. We have Zulfi Hamid tuning in as well. Zulfi, thank you very much. And Rajal Vaida, Steve Sellen, Mohit Pathan. So we got a lot of people tuning in, and I really appreciate that as well. So Steve Sellen, again, thanks very much for tuning in. So please do tee up your questions. We're going to kind of get into the conversation with Ranjit and I. And for those of you on Facebook, I will be checking in, but I want to really get started with this, with the conversation with Ranjit. And I am quite confident at the end of the hour that all of you taking the time to tune in, whether live or on replay, will take something beneficial away from this conversation. So, Ranjit, I'm going to start with a question. When you were just getting out of high school, did you have any idea that you would be where you're at today?
Firstly, Brett, too kind for that generous introduction. And hello to all those who logged in, including some former colleagues. And so, yeah, moving out of high school, Brett, no, I wouldn't say I'd be sitting here as a life and executive coach. But I think that's the journey, you know, and that's your life journey, and embracing and moving as you go along. But I would start with that.
Okay, good. So how much of the reason I asked that question is that how much of your success, 25 years in banking and now what you're doing, would you attribute to designing yourself?
Yeah. So I would say, Brett, especially those early years, you know, my dad was in the army, as you just mentioned, and I went to a boarding school very young, you know, rather than changing to the schools every 2 years. My dad and my parents in their wisdom said, put me to a boarding school right on the foothills of the Himalayas. And I spent 12 years of my life there, and, you know, was spending 8 months away from home. And what I didn't sort of, and all these dots eventually connect in your life, I was exposed to a hell of a lot of diversity. You know, there were people from different parts of the countries. There were often teachers from different parts of the world. There was just tremendous diversity that one was being exposed to. And if I fast forward thereon and see my journey, it took me to 3 different continents, And a lot of my sort of formative years, sort of, if I look back now, prepared me, and those dots sort of connected, whether it was adapting, whether it was, sort of being able to connect with different kinds of people, so it was something that was quite encouraging. And when I look back, I think a lot of those things really helped in my journey later on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's important, those early years and the formative years of that. And you touched on diversity. If you look at your first, let's call it your first career, the 25 years as a banker, and what would you say were the key insights and takeaways from that journey? Working in all those different places and different aspects of banking. You lived in a lot of different places as well. What would you say is your key takeaway from those 2.5 decades as a banker?
Yeah, a little over 2 decades. Good question, Brett. I think, so when I look back, I want to make the conversation a bit real as well. And I would say there were a lot of commissions, but there were a fair few omissions as well. And some things you sort of reflect on, and we'll get to the period during my transition. So I would say 2-3 things sort of helped me when I got them, a lot of them right, and 2-3 things that got in my way as well. So I think the first pieces was, this notion of time and experience. And we think it's the same, whereas, trying to make sure you're part, and in the time that you're in various roles, how much are you actually learning, and how much are you kind of building your own sort of balance sheet of capabilities, of skills, and chasing that learning. So a lot what I found sort of worked for me was being part of some real learning cycles during my various journeys, and stepping up the gear a little bit, particularly when those learning cycles, whether the stakes for the organization was high, as well as for you personally was high, and that got you a lot of credibility and visibility. So I think one piece for a lot of the viewers also sort of listening to this would be, identifying and chasing a lot of, especially in your early career, chasing a lot of that learning. And a lot of times we get too caught up into the earnings and what opportunities out there, and almost looking at what sort of capabilities are you sort of building. So I think that was a very key part of pieces that really worked well for me. And certain instances where I may have perhaps not taken as much of that as well. So those are some few insights, and let me think if there are certain other ones that crop up. Two would be also the role of mentors, role of good bosses, and I've had the privilege in yourself, and Rajal's on the line, and a few others. Many, in fact, why few? Many people, right? And not just people you worked for, but people who worked for you as well. And in various leadership journeys, leadership is not an entitlement. It's a privilege, and you learn from various people. Just having that open mind and an open heart to learn from anybody and anywhere. And the third notion would be choices. I think when you're making choices of moving and various pieces in your career, especially when you're looking to make quit or join decisions, almost try and think those through. Because a lot of times we tend to under leverage what's existing and over leverage what's out there on the other side, right? So trying to make some holistic decisions. But I would say what you do in the first half of your career, and particularly early career, is all about setting the second half. Those would be some certain insights. Your first half is really the catalyst for the second half. And a lot of this work, I also got inspired and related through this leader in India, Chandramouli, who's unfortunately no more. And he's done a lot of research and work in this area around careers. And something when I looked at my journey, I really related to it, was how do you set up that first half for the second half of your career? How do you chase the learning and building your own balance sheet, not just your income statement?
That's a really interesting. Yeah. That's a really interesting point. If I may, Ranjit, just ask you a little bit about that. So, as you were, because I have a similar perspective Okay. Although I must admit that during my career journey in corporate life, 30 years, about the same as you, right? I never thought of it as being a setup for my life beyond that career. Did you?
Yeah, and if you can just say a bit more here, there, Brett, just
Sure.
just a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was always okay. This is my so I'm purpose driven. This is my mission, and to me, growth was always important, but I never really viewed it as I was going through corporate life as okay. This is preparing me to do something completely different, which is what I'm doing now, than in the second part of my career. I never really viewed it that way. My question to you is,
Yes. Yeah.
was it similar for you, or did you view it as setting you up for the second half of your career?
Yeah. Well, good question, and thanks for that nuance there. No, if I look back and say, was I looking at certain pieces, certainly around learning, and when I look back now, which is why I said a lot of those insights were also to see how you'll reflect back on that journey. It wasn't in so many words saying, what am I doing that is setting up immediately for the second half? But certainly around a lot of the pieces were around, how are you learning? How are you growing? How are you sort of putting all those pieces together? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And let me explain mainly for the audience why I asked that question, because for those of you watching this, if you're in the midst of your, let's say the early to mid part of your career, what I'm hoping you can, a big takeaway from this conversation so far could be that if you're aware that you can do things now to set yourself up for doing something totally different, which my friend Mr. Bedi is doing now. We're going to talk about that. And what I did, Brett was not really conscious of the fact that all the great stuff I was doing is actually preparing me for something bigger in the future. I never really viewed it that way. I'd love to tell all of you that I did. So for those of you caught up in the corporate life, and as Ranjit said, income statements, balance sheets, and all this stuff, you got to do all that. But after this conversation, I'd love for all of you to say, based on what I'm doing now, can I do some things tomorrow and next week and next month and next year to prepare me to do something entirely different when I leave this corporate world? Because then you can probably save yourself years compared to what I went through, and maybe even what Ranjit went through, just by taking our hindsight knowledge of this as well. Would you add anything to that, Ranjit?
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah. And if I look at that journey as well, Brett, initially there's a lot of achievement that's driving you, right? When you start out. And then somewhere around the middle, you get to things like, mastery and putting my name and putting my brand to it. It's like that stamp of mastery. And when you go further down the line, and it's really, then you start getting into more stuff like meaning, right? And you're more transitioning from a space from that me to the more we space. And we'll talk about that as we go along to the transition. But so I think but the big takeaway for me was chase a lot of your capability, your skills, your experience. All of the other stuff sort of follows,
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad you raised that. I want to. Tony Robbins' mentor, Jim Rohn, is an individual I often speak about. I had the opportunity to go see him at a seminar back in 1988, which was fortunately 1 year into my career. And one of the things that Jim Rohn always says is something you just said, Ranjit, which is to work harder on yourself than you do on your job. In other words, build those skills. Skill up, right? Find time to go through. For me, I spent basically 19 years with a Citi, different ecosystem, and then I left Citi. And I learned really quickly I didn't know anything about leadership. I was a great manager, great processes, all this other stuff. But I'm mentioning this because I had a 30-year corporate career. The first 20 years, it went great. It was fantastic, great experiences. The final 10 years, once I learned leadership and really and culture and how to impact people in a big way, I had that freed up so much personal capacity for me to then work on building skills that I didn't have. And that payoff for that final decade of my corporate career was huge in terms of performance, impact on people, compensation. I mean, it was night and day. Significantly, all of those things were significantly higher because I was, for the first time in my career, working on myself and not just working for the company. Any comment on that?
No, fair point. Fair point, Brett. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the message. First message to the viewers is make sure you're working, like Ranjit said, on your skills and developing yourself, because if you're aware, it can set you up for an even brighter future. Do more of it, and you can make the time to do it that way, right? And if you can't make the time to do it that way, you should probably change companies anyway, because it is all about personal development. Ranjit, we've got.
And Brett, sorry, if I can just
Sure.
add one more piece to that.
Okay.
Is a lot in the initial journey. There's a lot of that low-hanging fruit, right? And to the latter part of your journey, it's a lot about the high-hanging fruit. So if you haven't exposed yourself to building a lot of skills, experience in that initial journey, it sort of catches up. As you said, leadership is a lot around the high-hanging fruit, you know. So when those learning sort of growth cycles come for you, you know, and that's the point to raise your hand and get stuck in. So just some insights there I thought would be useful too.
That's really useful. Thanks, Ranjit. Ranjit, we've got Paul from Nigeria saying, growth is really important. How do you measure your personal growth on your personal leadership journey?
Personal growth, Paul, I think a very, very good question. And I think a great ability of a leader, or why just a leader, any person, is to be, you know, ability to put the mirror to yourself. Right? And I think one of the things that I've really gotten to do and do deliberately is have a personal reflective practice for myself. Because I'm now in the business of holding space for people to access the very best in them. And a lot of the things I enjoy now is a large part of that is you got to walk the talk as well and do that for yourself. So I think how do you personally do that is having a strong reflective practice to see, you know, and having a deeper and a greater understanding of yourself. What excites you? What triggers you? You know, what's your attention like? In this tsunami of stuff, you know, lots of stuff are coming our way. How much attention am I paying to my own attention? You know, how do I listen? How do I show up? So a lot of those things in the realm of leadership actually are in the realm of being and not really doing. So I use that through a self-reflective practice to see, and then of course, you know, constantly giving and receiving feedback too. So those would be a few things that I do for myself, Brett. And Paul, hope that helps.
Thanks, Ranjit. Great question, Paul, on that as well. Paul also made something that I know you're passionate about, Ranjit, which is that every leadership journey can be made easier with the help of a mentor. Any comment on that?
Spot on. And in fact, no profound change that you're trying to undergo happens just by yourself. You need somebody where you can sense and feel yourself, somebody who's that mirror for you. And role of mentors, coaches is huge. And, you know, from time immemorial, you will see them from some elder in the family, you see a close friend, you see a coach, you see a professional mentor. I've had the privilege of so many during my days. And I don't say this to flatter Brett, but he's been one of mine through my journeys as well. And I think, I mean, the thing is, a few tips I'd give when you're looking at mentors is to have a mentor that's deeply vested in you. It's not like a counselor where, there's no, skin in the game. He's deeply vested. He or she is deeply vested in your success. That's one.
Okay.
And one who's able to give you a different point of view, right? Who can hold up that mirror to you as well. And thirdly, there's no conflict of any interest, right? There's no agenda. There's no sort of quid pro quo and stuff going on. So just some.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it shouldn't be your boss, right? It shouldn't be
right. Yeah.
either. Yeah, it shouldn't be your boss, and you want to avoid the conflict because a mentor and a mentee relationship should be all additive. It shouldn't be any give and take or anything like that, because that's really the purpose of a mentor. Tiger Woods has mentors, Michael Jordan had mentors. These professional legacies. There's something in that message. If they had a mentor and or a coach, there's a message there, right? So I always used to tell people, hey, if Tiger needs a coach, I probably need 5 coaches, right? So, yeah, that's great. Ranjit, let's transition now from banker to midlife transition, which I think you kind of went through for a 3-year period. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, Brett, this was actually a very, very transformational period for me. I had reached a point in my life where I'd achieved a lot of success, and that journey I was telling you, achieved a fair bit. You put your name to a lot of good things. I was in various careers can be very time poor and almost very time greedy, particularly for careers like consulting, financial services, VCs, all that kind of stuff. And you never really, they're very time poor, time greedy, and almost very identity consuming. And you really don't spend enough time exploring, or you don't get the time to explore a different direction. I don't want to generalize here, but that was just something I went through. So I reached a point where it was not just a career transition, it was almost like a life transition as well. I found myself, I had ailing and aging parents back home. I had a young family of my own. And whilst I'd achieved a lot, I was reaching a point where I was feeling a bit incomplete, seeking more meaning. And people call it a midlife crisis. I call it more of a midlife awareness. So it was a bunch of all of those things at play, and I just wanted to allow myself to reboot, renew, change the tires, and and then find myself from there. So that was the trigger point of the transition. That was the trigger point of my transition, and so I quit. And a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my bosses couldn't really understand. They were very supportive. And so that's what, sort of came back home. Some would say stupid, some would say courageous, but that was, I think, a very pivotal point in my journey. And if I can go on, therein began a very interesting period for me, Brett, because what tends to happen is once you strip yourself of your typical identity anchors, of the brands you worked for, of the places you've lived in, you really go through a very interesting period of really unpacking yourself, who you really are, right? What are 2-3 gifts that you have? What are things that you really care about? So it's you go through a period which is not a classic plan and implement sort of a period, so you're asking yourself a lot of questions. Who am I? And what is it that I'd really like to do that adds value? And I must say also a process of letting go. So you're challenging a lot of old assumptions, and you're almost moving from a very socialized mind, how others see you, to a more self-authored space and into what you care about. So it was a very, very, I didn't know at the time, but so I would say a lot of liminality, a lot of challenge, because people have always seen you in a certain way. And you're going through all of that. But there's Bruce Feller's book, and I would recommend to a lot of people. It says life is in the transitions. And they say your biggest growth happens in times of confusion, happens in interim places, happens in the wilderness. So
did you ever feel, Ranjit, just if I could, did you ever
yeah,
feel lost when you
of
were going through
course,
this?
of course, and that
What did
is
you do? How did you respond to that? I mean, was anybody there helping you, or how did you kind of find your way again when that would happen?
Sure, and I would say highly valued, Brett. You know, that feeling lost and feeling confused and feeling not sure is an integral part of that transition process. You know, it's not a classic, you sort of plan and you go from A to B. You actually start looking at, it's a process of discovery, and rather than looking at, you actually give yourself the permission to explore different and divergent future possible selves. You know, so it's a period of basically, and there's this lady and a lot of people I'll quote here, some people I followed, I read, and they were always a sorts of inspiration for me through this journey. And there's this lady, Aisha Bursell, based in the US, and she talks about life design. And she talks about, you know, there are certain things almost deconstructing your journey. And so looking at various ingredients that have been there in your journey that, you know, you reach where you are, and then kind of reconstructing it again. So almost making a soup, right? You made one soup or a dish, and the same ingredients, you make another one, right? And so back to your key question around, I would say feeling lost and all is extremely valued. Do not underestimate, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's an integral part of that process. And what it helped me was surrounding yourself with a lot of kindred spirits. And a lot of them actually on the call today, and you've held space on this journey, Brett, and so many others, right? I would really like to credit my life partner, because you're going through a process of almost, it's a very, you know, you're thinking and you're looking at different things. It's a very intuitive, discovery-led process. But for others around you, they've only seen you in a linear way. So it can be very confusing. And I was very, very fortunate to have a life partner and my family that was very, you know, very, I would say, very supportive. And I could sort of, I knew that all those people are around me, a lot of, as I said, a lot of friends, a lot of very dear friends who actually opened their heart. So a lot of good support system. Yeah, you do need that during that. And an inspiration as well from a lot of people you follow and read, etc. So yeah, that would be something.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And you know, for me personally, is that I mean, you know, not only the transition period for me, my life partner, my lovely wife Lori, I could not have made it through the 30 years of my career without her, because moving all over the world and taking on different types of assignments, and sometimes it was a phone call and we need you here, we need you to take an overnight flight, and boom, there you are. And then you wind up being there for 6 years, right? Yeah. You know, that type of life is can at times be kind of a quite a rapid pace, and there's no way I could have done that without the background support of my family as well. And I think that that's so important, that it does take teamwork to make it happen. It is, I just don't know how anybody could do anything of significance on their own. I haven't found one person in the world that is capable of doing great things by themselves. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great point. We've got a comment popping up from Webster, who is saying, Ranjit, you've worked in different cultures, geographies across your banking career. To what extent has the exposure to these different cultures shaped you professionally and also personally?
Hello, great question, Webster. Hello, and hope you're well. I think it's been profound, and and it's really helped me. Now, you don't realize a lot of these things, but the dots connect. As a coach today, I hold space for people to access the very best in them in quest of their professional and personal outcomes. And a lot of that is being able to have an open mind, have an open heart, right? And seeing the person from a space of complete non-judgment. And you only get there and having an unconditional positive regard. And I think these journeys across different cultures, across different places, just opened me up in so many ways, from Cairo to Cape Town, from Moscow to Jakarta, from Delhi to Maputo. I mean, when you're just, when you're amidst cultures, people who look different to you, who think differently to you, and that's so valuable, like my son is born in Johannesburg and he's got a special African spirit in him. And I'm glad he has, and he proudly says that. So I think, Webster, to your point, it helped me really just open up perspectives, open up your, how you think, how you open up your beliefs. And those were extremely powerful. And they even helped me in my transition into a coach, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think those were two pieces of again, that diversity theme emerges that helped me, in both these journeys.
Yeah, I get asked all the time, obviously, because I'm out there in the public domain about my views on diversity. And, my first response to that when somebody asks, so what do you think about diversity, is that I just say, I don't know any other way. And it's for the same reason you just mentioned. I won't repeat all of that, but it just baffles me why in some geographies, the United States being one of those, why people in powerful positions have such a hard time embracing diversity, and how they apply their unconscious bias. They don't even know what unconscious bias is. And so what happens is that they're doing things, maybe some intentionally, unfortunately, but some unintentionally, by not knowing that that they need to be more inclusive of everybody, and they would strengthen their team, their profit line, their own income, if they would just do the diversity. And it's really sad to me to know that so many people don't really see the value of diversity, and the fact that it's not an HR exercise. This is all part of building the most dynamic, creative team that you possibly can build, if you understand it. I know you don't know any other way either, Ranjit, because you've explained now a couple of times how you have kind of grown up with a lot of that diversity. And so I'm hoping that another key takeaway from this conversation will be for all the viewers to understand that the more diverse experiences you can have, and the more diverse work situations you can have, it's going to make not only you a better person, but if you're a leader, it's going to certainly help you build better, diverse teams. Yeah. So it's a great point. Ranjit, let's see. Paul had one more thing. He had a question. Is it okay to have a mentor outside your area of specialty? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it depends on which area you're looking for mentoring on. Would be, you're looking at it directly related to your sector, your industry, your role, then perhaps it would help for the mentor to have some knowledge there. But however, there are no right or wrongs, I would say. But if you're looking at a strictly professional kind of expertise, it would help for a mentor to have some sort of experience in that, in that space. However, you could have mentors in different, domains, right? You could have a mentor that helps you around communication, someone who helps you around, various spaces. So that would be my takeaway.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think my answer to the question would be yes. And I mean, I agree with Ranjit. Is that it probably depends. I mean, if you're going into STEM research, right, and you're looking for a good mentorship, it might not be a bad idea if something's highly specialized, to then find somebody that is at least familiar with what STEM research is, right? But if it's more general in nature, that you're just looking on how to navigate corporate politics, you're looking how to think about your career transition, things like that, then I think a mentor outside the industry can be quite good. I'll shout out to one of the former chairmen of Barclays Bank in Zambia during my time there, JJ Sekwazwe, had an extensive background in, I think he worked for Coca-Cola. Webster, correct me if I'm wrong on that in the comments. But the insight that he was able to share in different parts of Africa from his time at Coca-Cola, assuming that's the company, was just invaluable to our making key HR decisions about people and doing planning of resources. And so I think that getting people outside the industry is a good thing, Paul, if you can, unless it's required. So yeah, it's a good point. Moet, thank you for coming in on the program. And Moet agrees with your point on the first half of your career and great insights on the transition phase. So let's talk, Ranjit, now about what you're doing. So you went through this period, you went through a time of feeling lost at times. You talked about how you're able to get unlost and re-find yourself, and you went through this 3-year period. So all the dust is kind of settled on that part of it as well. Tell us what you're doing now.
Yeah. And Brett, perhaps I'll share a little bit more just to round that previous piece off, because that's a segue into what I'm doing now.
Feel free.
So what I'd also share with folks going through key life or sort of career transitions is to allow for a certain space for things to emerge. You know, as I said, it is not a classic plan and implement. You can think your way into doing. You got to allow for a lot of discovery. You got to allow for a lot of experimentation. And almost, you know, you're acting your way into thinking. And the key metric you should measure there is how much are you exploring, how much are you discovering, as opposed to the time that is lapsing. Because a lot of times, as you know, there are various points that I went through, you can almost self-sabotage, and you can foreclose too early. Hey, you know, I'm meeting some people, they're asking me, what are you doing again? And all sorts of stuff comes on. So I was looking at different future possible selves. And during this space, I looked at various things, sports, you know, in the sports industry. I was always very passionate about sport when I was looking to start out. And during this whole period, the whole space of coaching emerged for me. And I interacted with a lot of people, and they said, you know, you've genuinely cared for a lot of, throughout your learning, leadership journeys across the world for people. And have you thought of doing it in a more nuanced way? And I don't know if, Brett, you're certainly here, Rajul may be on the call, and I used to remember a lot of our council meetings, and I used to be always harping on about the colleague agenda. So, you know, there was a lot of that space that was always, few of those things that were always there within me. And culture work and stuff like that. So you know, and it's serendipitous, and this was my key learning as well. Allow for certain things to emerge rather than controlling everything. And I had a very serendipitous discussion at a dinner, and I met a gentleman who was a coach, and I got curious. So what do you do? And one thing led to the other, and he said, well, if you're going through a transition, why don't you experience this process? And if something that's to your liking, there may be something, and if nothing, it's a no regrets move. It helps you through your transition. And I've just found that process. So I just captured my imagination. It was transformational in my journey. And, you know, a lot of times we've been taught to place a lot of importance to our cognitive ability, to how we are thinking. But I'd also say this, that place a lot of importance to how you're feeling, how you energetically connecting with any space. And I instantly connected with it. And that caught my imagination. And I said, hey, collaboration is one of my key values. People and connection is one of my key values. Giving is one of my key values. Love and healing, a lot of people told me. And I said, oh, wow. So there's a new soup that can be made here with the same ingredients that I have at my journey. And so it just captured my imagination. And I said, wow, you know, the key thing I was in search of, almost from that, a lot of success to more significance, arrived in this whole space of coaching. And then I began my formal training with the International Coaching Federation, as well as the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. It's a rigorous process. It's not, as we, you know, a lot of people call themselves coaches, but there's a certain cadence, there's a certain charter, there's certain ethics. And And here I am back on the pitch in the second half as a reinvented avatar, as a coach, holding space for people to access the very best in them, Brett. So let me just pause there. And I think your question was, what am I doing now? And so coaching is the key anchor, and I do a variety of work there. I, of course, leaning on my corporate experience, I help a lot of leaders and teams, anything at the intersection of leadership, culture, collaboration, teams, particularly in a multi-geography, multicultural context. I also help people with going through key transition points in their life, particularly life transitions, midlife transitions. And something that I'm very, very passionate about, and I wish I had a lot of these tools that I benefited from in my midlife, is to also give this back to young people. And I sort of spend time with a lot of young people, and I get to learn a lot through that journey as well, because coaching is not just the luxury of the C-suite. In fact, if you give these tools in the hands of young people, who says the power of compounding is only in finance? You've got the person, which is the asset, they've got time on their side, and if you can give them these tools, it just compounds with time. So, help them to really get the best out of them. So, is that the only thing I do? It's a portfolio of stuff that is adjacent to it. Facilitation, consulting. I'm also a partner in an e-learning London-based startup. But coaching is the key anchor. That's what gives me real meaning, drives a lot of my joy. And really, it was a function of two things. One was a context beyond myself. I was in search of giving. And I think the other piece, and where that whole so-called product market fit in an individual context came through, was it also helps you work a lot on yourself. So as you hold space for other people, it helps you work a lot on yourself.
You certainly did a lot of that during that 3 years.
Yeah, so help a lot on yourself. And
yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like, Ranjit, that just back to the journey, because that was really a defining time of your life where you went through, we talked about you being lost, and then you figured out a way to find yourself, and then you eventually found the passion and what you wanted to pursue, leveraging a lot of the same soup ingredients, right? You figured out how to do all of that. But it sounds to me like you also discovered a way that when you're going through this period of transition, that you found a way to enjoy it.
Yes.
But it probably wasn't that way in the early time, right? I mean, I'm raising this point because I want to give some great value to the listeners here and people tuning in, to know that when you're going through a rough period, it's not going to last forever, but you have to do something in order to make the pain go away, or to change the game up to a degree, right? So I think that it's important to point that out. Any comments on that?
Yeah, and if I just like to add to that, Brett, I think that period is you've got to go through that, right? It's almost like a butterfly, right? A beautiful butterfly doesn't become a beautiful butterfly till it goes through the hustle stage of the caterpillar. So I would say it's to be valued, right? So I just want to tell a lot of the viewers, it's absolutely okay to feel a bit, as I said, it's a process of discovery, transitions. It's not a hack. It's not something you just plan your way. You just sit and make a to-do list and off you go. You're actually reflecting on your life. You're letting go to let come. You're unfolding. And it's a very important period. So I would say value that, treasure that. It's an integral part of that process.
I think you're right, Ranjit. You cannot learn how to swim without getting in the water. And, people need to understand that. So you do have to dive in and go through the journey. But I think the point that what Ranjit and I are extracting here is that there's different ways to get through that journey, right? And when you're feeling lost, there's a way that you can be found. Ranjit talked about mentors, coaches are a necessary ingredient. No one person can do anything significant on their own. these kind of principles, as you're swimming, taking that swim, learning how to swim, can really speed things up for you really quickly.
Yeah. And Brett, if I can just add, it's a period of more outside than inside. Don't try and do this sitting on your desk making a list. Oh, I'll do X, Y, and Z. Get out there. Just outside. Reach out to your people who work for you, who you work for. It's enjoy that process of discovery, because that's what's really getting you there. So the key metric here should be, how much are you getting out there? How much are you discovering? How much are you experimenting? As opposed to the time that's been lost.
So that's a fantastic point, and get in the game, right? And don't wait for things to be perfect. We're all human, and actually, believe it or not, in this changing world that we're in, imperfection is more valued by the marketplace, and attention spans of people, which are getting shorter, by the way, right? You do something on social media, you've got 3 seconds to get them to stop scrolling. And if they don't do it, it's just it's history. That's what it is. So in this world, that's a very important piece of advice that you've given, Ranjit, as well. Okay, talk to us a little bit about your ideal client now, and like who could benefit the most from what you're doing now. You've got all these certifications, you've got all this wonderful experience, you've got a great purpose, great mission, a fantastic business, you've already got a little portfolio going. Your clients that could benefit the most, are they in India? Can they be anywhere in the world? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and Brett, I would not say that I know it all. I'm still very much in that process of building things out, and I guess it's always going to be. But for the moment, in terms of geography, in having had a global multicultural journey myself, my clients are global, and I really enjoy that, and particularly holding space for people who are actually working across different cultures. Somebody having a home office in Seattle to having a sort of an outfit in Botswana. How do you work on mindsets with that, right? So so I would say 2-3 areas. One is around key life transitions, right? That is one area that I work with, having gone through that a deep one myself. Yep. And how do you help folks move from more, as I said, from transition from success to more significance. A lot of my corporate experience, I've worked with a lot of leaders and teams, enhancing their impact. As I said, a lot of the young minds. So those would be the pieces I've sort of begun with, and I'm sure as I move along, I learn a lot more and see what more. But I think it's keeping me very busy at the moment, and that's really what I'm focusing on right now.
That's fantastic, Ranjit. For the there's something happening in the U.S. now called the Great Resignation. I'm sure you've heard of it, and that's where a lot of people, for probably the last decade or so, I have the viewpoint anyway, that the pandemic did not cause the Great Resignation, but it accelerated it. And where there's been for the past decade or so a philosophy of profits before people by big firms instead of people before profits, which I know you subscribe to. My question is, for those people that are fed up, and many have quit because it's less risky for them to not work and to continue dealing with the types of cultural defects in their work environment. My question to you is, for those people kind of sitting on the fence right now saying, I'm thinking about a career transition, should I go into tech or should I, do whatever? What are a couple of things that they should think about before taking that decision?
Yeah, a few things. Good question, Brett. A few things. One would be to obviously look at your personal circumstances, and how much time you can allow for looking and exploring.
Yep.
But I think the key bit here is, again, back to the piece we started with. What really, what nurtures and nourishes you? Finding what are those pieces that connect you? What are things that really energize you? And almost working a lot on that, discovering a lot of that, and then exploring your way forward. So I think those were some of the things that were emerging for me. Have a look at some of your personal circumstances. Are you learning? I mean, one of the quick decisions is if you're not learning enough, and if there's not a culture fit, that's a quick decision.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's a very quick decision, right? So,
yeah. One key measure would be learning, and I mean, thinking through that. And I think it's beyond titles, it's built beyond what you can earn. It's about what is really connecting you, finding your joy.
Right. Yep. Gets back to the purpose, and which I have the view that all of our purposes, we're born with it, and we just need to find it. So and until you find it, you might be drifting a bit. So it's great advice, Ranjit. Thanks for sharing that.
That was an epiphany for me. Like Mark Twain said, 2 most important days in your life: the day you're born and the day you find out why. You figure out why.
So, there you go.
I had an epiphany when it came to my coaching. When that whole coaching thing landed, I said, "Wow."
Yeah, that's pretty wise advice. So that's great. Just one thing before we wrap up. So Webster, thank you for getting back to me. I was incorrect earlier talking about JJ Causeway with Coca-Cola. It was British Petroleum. So I just want to kind of correct the record on that. Ranjit, as we start to wrap up, your key life lessons, if you could just leave a couple of key life lessons that I'm sure will resonate with a lot of people, to some, when you add everything up, 20 plus years as a banker, plus what your transition, which was invaluable, the sharings there, plus what you're doing now, how would you kind of sum it up if you could just throw a few things out there for people to think about?
Sure, Brad. Good question. So a few things emerge for me. I think the first and foremost is we tend to externalize a lot of our challenges in our lives. And the biggest and the most important piece is build a deliberate and a kind relationship with yourself. I think the greater the quality of the inner relationship, the greater your outward success. So that would be one piece. That's something I went through. That would be number one. Second would be, embracing a more learn-it-all approach rather than a know-it-all kind of a mindset. Yeah. In fact, the number one cause of all our stress is when we are in a destination mode, when we make everything about a destination. Hey, I'll be happy when I get this. Oh, and the root of that is always some kind of fear, insecurity, blame, all of those pieces. And it's a scarcity mindset. So I would say be more in the journey, bit by bit each day, and over a period of time, your castle is going to be built. There's no question. So be more in the journey rather than in the destination would be a second one. The third link to that is direction is more important than distance. Settle on a broad direction. Nobody can have that one killer innovation, have a perfect plan. Settle on a broad direction and then be very flexible how you get there. And enjoy that journey. And the final bit I want to say is,
go ahead.
The final bit I want to say, Brett, is that the value of a human life is not just professional potential. It's an element of it, yes. So figure out, go through a process of really connecting with who you are. And everything is not just professional potential, because sometimes we confuse the two, your life potential and your professional potential. And there's so many things beyond your job title.
Right. And I think if you take that and the concept we spoke earlier about working on yourself, even when you're, work hard on yourself, build those skills, even when you're working hard on the job, you need to find a way to create the time to do that, because it's your life, right? To your point, Ranjit, and to live your best life, work on yourself. Don't always work for somebody else, because you're just not you're gonna find that your growth stagnates when that happens, right?
Yeah. And a key thing I'll add there, Brett, is as you build that relationship with yourself, build that with love and kindness, not judgment. Right? Because a lot of time, what we don't inadvertently do is we start brutalizing ourselves, start comparing, start doing a lot of things. Of course, learn, approach growth, all of those things, but with kindness.
Absolutely.
To yourself.
It makes
that power of empathy to yourself.
Yeah, we'd have a lot fewer problems in the world if that were the mindset. But I think that is something that every one of us has the power to do, which is to show kindness, right? And great, Ranjit, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. There's been a lot of I think powerful points that you've raised here through your credible journey. And I really appreciate you sharing that here on the Packard Network Live. And I know that that there's going to be many people that if they weren't watching it live, they're going to see it over the weekend. And I know that some of these concepts they're going to be able to take, whether it's around mentorship, whether it's around finding your purpose, and whether it's around getting lost and then found again. All the many great nuggets of information that you shared are invaluable, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you, Brett. Really grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
That's fantastic, and all the best to you and everybody in Delhi and the great country of India. And please continue to be safe. Everybody, if you next on the Packard Network Live, I'll be on the air, I think the week from Monday. There's a scheduling matter, so I'll be getting some stuff out late next week. And my cameras will be in the UK with a very special guest that worked in agricultural finance amongst a lot of other things. We're going to talk about some really interesting aspects on life and business, but also we're going to share a little bit of information on what it's like when you're looking at the agricultural sector as well. And I think that many of you will find that incredibly interesting, and you're going to love the guests that I have lined up for that as well. So with that, we're going to sign off now, and I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in and wishing everybody a very wonderful